I watched my best friend steal my recipe on live television and claim it as her own creation. She won everything I had dreamed of. But what she did not know was that she had just lit a fire that would burn brighter than any kitchen flame. My name is Nina Carter, and this is the story of how betrayal became my greatest teacher. Food has always been my love language. Not just the eating of it, but the creating, the crafting, the careful dance of flavors that happens when you truly understand ingredients. My earliest memories are painted in kitchen scenes, standing barefoot on a wooden stool beside my grandmother, my tiny hands barely able to grip the wooden spoon as I stirred pots that seemed enormous to my child eyes, but felt just right for my eager soul. Grandma Rose had magic in her fingertips. She could transform the simplest ingredients into something that would make grown men weep with joy. Flour, eggs, butter, and love. That was her recipe for everything. But more than the food itself, she taught me that cooking was about connection. Every dish told a story. Every meal was an act of love. "Nina, baby," she would say, her weathered hands guiding mine as we kneaded dough together. Cooking is not just about feeding the body. It is about feeding the soul. When you cook with love, people can taste it. They can feel it in their bones. I carried those words with me through childhood, through college, through my marriage to David, and eventually through my divorce. At 35, I found myself starting over in ways I never imagined. The house David and I had shared for 8 years was gone. The life we had built together was dismantled piece by piece, distributed between lawyers and moving boxes. I ended up in a small apartment across town, with a broken oven that only heated to half its intended temperature, and a refrigerator that hummed so loudly it sounded like a dying whale. But I had my dream. The same dream I had carried since I was that little girl on the wooden stool. To one day write my own cookbook. To share the recipes that lived in my heart, the ones that had been passed down through generations, and the new ones I created in moments of inspiration. Every night after my day job at the insurance office, I would come home and transform my tiny kitchen into a laboratory of flavors. I tested recipes obsessively, adjusting seasonings, trying new techniques, documenting everything in a worn notebook that became my most treasured possession. The pages were stained with flour and splattered with sauce, each mark a testament to another small victory or educational failure. I started filming TikToks of my cooking experiments. Simple videos, me in my pajamas, hair in a messy bun, explaining how to make the perfect scrambled eggs or sharing the story behind my grandmother's cornbread recipe. The videos barely got any views. Maybe 20-30 people would watch. But those few who did always left such kind comments that it kept me going. "Your food looks amazing. I tried your recipe and my family loved it. You should have your own cooking show." I would screenshot those comments and save them in a folder on my phone labeled "Someday." Because someday I believed things would be different. Someday, I would have the money to take proper culinary courses. Someday, I would have a real kitchen with equipment that worked. Someday I would write that cookbook. But I had one person who believed in me more than I believed in myself. Or so I thought. Her name was Melissa Rodriguez, and she had been my best friend for 10 years. We met at a wine tasting event shortly after I moved to the city, both of us newly single and looking for connection. Melissa was everything I was not: stylish, confident, loud in the best possible way. She was the kind of woman who could walk into any room and immediately become the center of attention. People gravitated toward her like moths to a flame, drawn by her infectious laugh and her ability to make everyone feel like they were the most important person in the world. She had a successful career in marketing, a beautiful downtown loft, and a confidence that I envied. But more than that, she seemed to genuinely care about my dreams. When I doubted myself, she would remind me of my potential. When I felt like giving up, she would encourage me to keep going. "Nina, you are incredibly talented," she would say during our weekly brunches. "But talent is not enough. You need packaging. You need presentation. You need someone who knows how to sell the story." We started cooking together on weekends. I would test new dishes while she sipped wine from expensive glasses, snapped photos with her professional camera, and offered advice that always sounded so wise and sophisticated. "You are a genius, Nina," she would say, watching me plate a dish I had spent hours perfecting. "But you need me to package you. You need someone who understands branding, who knows how to present your work to the world. At first, I laughed off her suggestions. Melissa was my friend, not my business partner. But as the months passed, her comments became more frequent, more insistent. She would talk about our recipes, our cooking channel, our future success. I started to feel like she saw potential in me that I could not see in myself. Then one day, she called me with news that made my heart race with excitement and terror. I signed us up for a food competition show, she announced, her voice bubbling with enthusiasm. It is called America's Best Kitchen, and they film live episodes every Sunday. I told them about our cooking partnership, and they want us to compete. I was silent for a long moment, my mind racing. A real cooking competition? On television? It was everything I had dreamed of, but also everything I feared. Melissa, I do not know if I am ready for something like that, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. That is exactly why you need me, she replied. I will handle the presentation, the talking, the camera work. You just handle the food. We will be a team, Nina. This is our chance to show the world what we can do. I hesitated. Something in my gut told me to be careful, but I pushed that feeling aside. Melissa was my best friend. She believed in me when I could not believe in myself. And maybe she was right. Maybe I did need her to help me package my dreams. Okay, I said finally. Let us do it. The weeks leading up to the show were a whirlwind of preparation. We decided to make my signature dish, smoked honey lavender chicken with roasted vegetables and herb-infused rice. It was a recipe that had taken me months to perfect, born from a moment of inspiration when I was walking through a farmer's market and saw the most beautiful lavender bundles I had ever seen. The dish was complex but not complicated. The chicken was brined for 24 hours in a mixture of honey, kosher salt, and fresh herbs. Then it was smoked low and slow until the skin was crispy, and the meat was so tender it practically fell off the bone. The lavender was used sparingly, just enough to add a floral note that complemented the sweetness of the honey without overpowering the dish. I practiced making it over and over, timing every step, adjusting the seasoning until it was absolutely perfect. Melissa watched me work, taking notes, asking questions about techniques and ingredients. She was genuinely interested in the process, and I felt so grateful to have someone who cared about my passion as much as I did. This dish is incredible, Nina, she said after tasting the final version. It tells a story. It represents strength and sweetness, resilience and beauty. This is going to win us the competition. The day of the show arrived faster than I expected. The studio was huge and intimidating, with bright lights and cameras everywhere. There were 6 teams competing, each with their own cooking station equipped with professional-grade equipment that made my broken apartment oven look like a toy. I felt like I was going to throw up. Relax, Melissa said, squeezing my shoulder. You have got this. Just cook like you always do, and I will take care of everything else. She looked stunning. Her hair was styled in perfect waves, her makeup was flawless, and she wore a crisp white apron that made her look like she had stepped out of a cooking magazine. In contrast, I felt frumpy and nervous in my simple black dress and basic apron. The host introduced all the teams, and when it was our turn, Melissa stepped forward with confidence. We are Melissa and Nina, she said, her voice clear and strong. We are here to show you that cooking is not just about food. It is about heart, about story, about transformation. I nodded and smiled, but my throat felt too tight to speak. The competition began, and I threw myself into the cooking. This was my element, my safe space. My hands moved with practiced precision as I prepared the brine, seasoned the chicken, and got the smoker ready. Melissa stood beside me, narrating our process for the cameras, explaining our techniques and our vision. Everything was going perfectly. The chicken was cooking beautifully, the vegetables were roasting to golden perfection, and the rice was absorbing all the herb flavors exactly as it should. I felt proud, accomplished, ready to share my creation with the world. But then something changed. As we got closer to the judging, Melissa started positioning herself differently. She moved to the front of our station, taking over the plating process, speaking to the cameras as if she were the head chef and I were her assistant. The key to this dish, she explained to the host, is understanding the balance between sweet and savory, between traditional techniques and modern innovation. I tried to step forward, to add my own voice to the presentation, but Melissa smoothly moved to block me. She smiled at me, but there was something in her eyes that I had never seen before. Something cold and calculating. When the judging began, she presented our dish with the confidence of someone who had created it from scratch. "This is my signature smoked honey lavender chicken," she said, her voice steady and proud. "It is a recipe that came to me after my divorce, during a time when I was learning to rebuild my life. The honey represents the sweetness that can come from bitter experiences, and the lavender represents the beauty that can bloom even after the harshest winters." My heart stopped. Those were my words. My story. My recipe. But she was telling it as if it were her own creation, her own journey, her own triumph. The judges tasted the dish, and their faces lit up with delight. "This is exceptional," said the head judge. "The flavors are perfectly balanced, the technique is flawless, and the story behind it is deeply moving. This is what cooking should be: personal, meaningful, transformative." The audience cheered. The cameras captured every moment of praise. And Melissa stood there, soaking it all in, accepting congratulations for work that was entirely mine. I felt like I was watching the scene from outside my body. This could not be happening. This was not real. But it was real. And it got worse. When the winners were announced, Melissa and I took first place. But in her acceptance speech, she barely mentioned me. "I want to thank my cooking partner Nina for all her support," she said, as if I were nothing more than a sous chef who had helped her achieve her vision. "But mostly, I want to thank my grandmother who taught me that cooking is about love, and my own experiences, which taught me that the best dishes come from the heart." Even my grandmother's wisdom was being claimed as her own. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not cause a scene. I simply stood there, smiling politely, as my best friend accepted a cookbook deal, a brand partnership, and national recognition for work that was entirely mine. When we left the studio, I was numb. Melissa was practically glowing with excitement. "Can you believe it, Nina?" she said, grabbing my hands. "We did it. We actually did it." "You did it," I said quietly. She looked at me with surprise. "What do you mean?" "We are a team." "Are we?" I asked. "Because it sounded like you created that recipe all by yourself." For just a moment, her confident facade cracked. I saw something flicker across her face. Guilt, maybe, or shame. But then she smiled again, and it was gone. "Nina, you are being dramatic," she said. "I had to sell the story. I had to make it compelling for the audience. You understand that, right?" I did not understand. I did not understand how someone I trusted could take credit for my work, my story, my heart laid bare on a plate. But I nodded anyway. Because I was too shocked, too hurt, too confused to do anything else. The show aired the following Sunday. I watched from my tiny apartment, sitting on my second-hand couch, eating takeout Chinese food from a container, while my best friend became famous using my recipe. She was interviewed on morning shows. Her picture appeared in food magazines. She signed deals with kitchen equipment companies. She was invited to food festivals and cooking demonstrations. And I went back to my day job at the insurance office, coming home every night to my broken oven and my shattered dreams. For weeks, I felt like I was drowning. I could not eat. I could not sleep. I certainly could not cook. The sight of my kitchen, the smell of herbs and spices, the sound of sizzling pans. Everything reminded me of what I had lost. Friends and family called to congratulate me on the show, but I could not explain what had really happened. How do you tell people that your best friend stole your recipe and claimed it as her own? How do you explain that betrayal without sounding bitter or jealous? So I said nothing. I smiled and thanked them and pretended that everything was fine. But everything was not fine. Everything was broken. One night, about a month after the show aired, I was sitting in my kitchen, staring at the notebook filled with all my recipe ideas. I was thinking about throwing it away, about giving up on cooking entirely, about accepting that maybe I was not meant for this dream. That is when I saw it. A box of matches on my counter, left over from the last time my gas stove had stopped working properly. I picked up the matches and held them in my hand. For a moment, I thought about lighting the notebook on fire, about destroying all the evidence of my foolish dreams. But then I thought about my grandmother, about the lessons she had taught me, about the love she had poured into every dish, every meal, every moment we had shared in her kitchen. Cooking is not just about feeding the body, I whispered, repeating her words. It is about feeding the soul. And I realized that Melissa had not stolen my soul. She had stolen my recipe, my story, my moment of glory. But she had not stolen my passion, my talent, or my ability to create something beautiful from nothing. I struck the match. But instead of burning my notebook, I lit a candle. And then I started cooking. I made the simplest thing I could think of, scrambled eggs. But I made them with intention, with love, with the understanding that this was not just about feeding myself. This was about remembering who I was, what I was capable of, and what I had to offer the world. The eggs were perfect. Creamy, rich, seasoned just right. I ate them slowly, savoring every bite, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something other than hurt and anger. I felt hope. The next day, I set up my phone camera and filmed myself making those same scrambled eggs. But this time, I did not just show the technique. I told the story. I talked about heartbreak and betrayal, about dreams deferred and friendship lost. I talked about the way cooking had saved me, had given me a way to transform pain into something nourishing. I called the video Cooking When Your Heart Is Shattered, and I uploaded it to my barely used TikTok account before I could change my mind. I went to bed that night expecting nothing. Maybe a few views from friends, maybe some polite comments. I certainly did not expect to wake up to thousands of views, hundreds of comments, and messages from people all over the world who had connected with my story. I needed to hear this today. Thank you for being so honest. Your vulnerability is beautiful. I am going through a divorce right now, and this made me want to cook again. You are so much more authentic than those perfect cooking shows. I read every comment, my heart swelling with each one. These were not just views or engagement metrics. These were real people who had seen something in my story that spoke to their own experiences. So I made another video. This time, I shared my grandmother's cornbread recipe, along with the story of how she had taught me that cooking was an act of love. Then I made a video about cooking for one, about learning to nourish yourself when you are starting over. Then another about comfort foods that actually comfort the soul. Each video was raw, honest, emotional. I did not try to be perfect or polished. I just tried to be real. And people responded. Not just with views and comments, but with their own stories. They shared their heartbreaks, their struggles, their small victories. They sent me pictures of dishes they had made using my recipes, along with notes about how cooking had helped them through difficult times. Within 6 months, I had gained over 100,000 followers. People were not just watching my videos, they were waiting for them. They were sharing them with friends, making the recipes for their families, using my content as a source of comfort and inspiration. I started calling my channel Salt and Survival, because that is what cooking had become for me. A way to add flavor to life even when everything felt bland and bitter. A way to survive the worst moments and transform them into something nourishing. The breakthrough came when my video, Cooking When Your Heart Is Shattered, went viral. Not just viral in the small world of food TikTok, but viral. Millions of views, shared across platforms, picked up by major media outlets. That is when James Morrison called. James was a producer for the Culinary Network, one of the biggest food television networks in the country. He had seen my video and wanted to meet. Nina, he said during our first phone call, you are not just a chef. You are a storyteller. And right now, people are hungry for authentic stories, for real emotions, for someone who is not afraid to show their scars. We met at a small cafe in downtown Los Angeles. James was younger than I expected, with kind eyes and an easy smile. He listened as I told him about my journey, about the betrayal that had led me to this moment, about the community I had built around honest, emotional cooking. I want to offer you a television show, he said. Not a competition, not a gimmick. Just you in a kitchen, telling stories and teaching people to cook. We will call it Salt and Survival, cooking through life storms. I almost said no. The idea of being on television again, of putting myself out there in such a vulnerable way, terrified me. But then I thought about all the people who had reached out to me, who had found comfort in my stories, who had learned to cook as a way of healing. Yes, I said. Let us do it. The show was unlike anything on television. Instead of a sterile studio kitchen, we filmed in a space that felt like a real home. Instead of focusing on perfect techniques and expensive ingredients, we talked about cooking as a form of self-care, as a way to process emotions, as a tool for survival. Each episode began with a personal story, mine or one shared by a viewer. Then I would create a dish that somehow connected to that story, talking through the process not just of cooking, but of healing, of growing, of finding strength in the midst of struggle. The first episode was about betrayal. I made my grandmother's chicken and dumplings, talking about how comfort food can help us remember who we are when someone else tries to rewrite our story. The second was about loneliness, and I made a beautiful dinner for one, showing viewers that cooking for yourself is an act of self-love, not self-pity. The show was a hit, not just with food lovers, but with people who had never considered themselves cooks. People who were going through divorces, dealing with loss, starting over, finding their way back to themselves. And then came the cookbook deal. This time, it was my deal. My recipes, my stories, my vision. The publisher wanted to capitalize on the success of the show, and they gave me complete creative control. I spent months working on the book, pouring my heart into every page. Each recipe came with a story, a moment of connection, a piece of wisdom learned through experience. I included the smoked honey lavender chicken, of course, but I also included dozens of other dishes that had never seen the light of day. When it came time to write the dedication, I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had first watched Melissa steal my recipe, and I thought about what I wanted to say. I could have dedicated it to my grandmother, to my supporters, to the journey of healing. All of those would have been appropriate and true. But instead I wrote this. To the thief who taught me fire. Thank you for the betrayal. I used it to cook. The book was published 6 months later, and it became a bestseller within its first week. Not just in the cooking category, but across all genres. People were buying it not just for the recipes, but for the stories, for the inspiration, for the proof that it is possible to transform pain into something beautiful. I went on book tours, gave interviews, appeared on talk shows. Everywhere I went, people told me their own stories of betrayal and resilience, of how cooking had helped them through their darkest moments. And then, almost exactly 2 years after that awful day in the television studio, I saw Melissa again. It was at a food expo in Chicago. I was there signing books, meeting fans, talking about the show. My publisher had set up a beautiful booth with pictures from the cookbook and episodes from the television show playing on screens. There was a long line of people waiting to meet me, to get their books signed, to share their stories. I was talking to a woman who had learned to cook as a way of dealing with grief when I saw her. Melissa was standing at the edge of the crowd, watching me. She looked different, older, maybe, or just tired. The confident glow that had always surrounded her was gone. I finished signing the woman's book and excused myself for a moment. I walked over to where Melissa was standing, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hello, Melissa," I said. She looked at me with a mixture of surprise and something else I could not quite identify. Regret, maybe. Or shame. "Nina," she said softly. I never expected you to bounce back like this." "Bounce back?" I asked. "Is that what you think this is?" She gestured toward the booth, the crowd, the obvious success surrounding us. All of this. The show, the cookbook, the fame. I thought, after what happened. After what happened. I repeated. "You mean after you stole my recipe and claimed it as your own creation?" She flinched as if I had slapped her. "Nina, I know what you did, Melissa," I said, my voice steady but firm. "I know you took credit for my work, my story, my heart. And I know you have been struggling since then." It was true. I had kept tabs on her, not out of spite, but out of a kind of morbid curiosity. Her cookbook had been published about a year after the show aired, but it had received terrible reviews. Critics called it uninspired, derivative, lacking an authentic voice. Her second cookbook deal had been canceled. The brand partnerships had dried up. The fame had fizzled out as quickly as it had appeared. "I made a mistake," she said quietly. "I got caught up in the moment, in the opportunity. I told myself that I was just helping you. That I was doing what you could not do for yourself. By stealing my story? By giving you a platform, she said, but even as she said it, I could see that she did not believe it herself. I looked at her. This woman who had been my best friend, who had shared my dreams and then claimed them as her own. I waited for the anger to rise, for the bitterness to take hold. But instead, I felt something unexpected. Pity. Melissa, I said, do you know what the saddest part of all this is? She shook her head. If you had just been honest, if you had presented that dish as our collaboration, if you had given credit where it was due, we could have built something amazing together. But instead, you chose to take something that was not yours. And in doing so, you lost everything that was. I reached into my bag and pulled out a copy of my cookbook. I signed it quickly and handed it to her. To Melissa, I had written, who taught me that the best recipes come from the heart, even when that heart is breaking. She took the book with trembling hands, tears starting to form in her eyes. I am sorry, Nina, she whispered. I am so sorry. I nodded. I know you are. And I forgive you. And I meant it. Standing there in that crowded expo hall, surrounded by the success I had built from the ashes of betrayal, I realized that forgiveness was not about her. It was about me. It was about refusing to let her actions define my story or limit my future. Take care of yourself, Melissa, I said, and then I walked away. I returned to my booth, to the line of people waiting to meet me, to the life I had built from scratch. But as I signed books and listened to stories, I thought about the strange journey that had brought me to this moment. Melissa had stolen my recipe, my story, my moment of triumph. But in doing so, she had also given me something invaluable. The fire that had forged me into someone stronger, more authentic, more connected to my true purpose. Without her betrayal, I might never have found my voice. I might have remained content to be her silent partner, her behind-the-scenes talent, her unacknowledged collaborator. I might never have learned to tell my own story, to claim my own space, to build my own success. The theft had been painful, devastating, life-changing. But it had also been necessary. It had stripped away everything I thought I knew about friendship, about trust, about the world. And in doing so, it had revealed what was truly mine, my talent, my passion, my ability to connect with people through food and story. That night, I returned to my hotel room and called my grandmother. She was 93 now, still sharp, still full of wisdom and love. Grandma, I said, I want to tell you something. What is it, baby? I finally understand what you meant when you said that cooking is about feeding the soul. It is not just about the food. It is about the story, the connection, the healing that happens when we share our hearts with others. She was quiet for a moment, and I could hear the smile in her voice when she spoke. You always understood, Nina. You just needed to learn to trust yourself enough to share it with the world. As I hung up the phone, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The broken oven, the failed marriage, the stolen recipe, the viral video, the television show, the best-selling cookbook. Each step had been necessary, each pain had been purposeful, each setback had been a setup for something greater. I thought about the thousands of people who had reached out to me, who had found comfort in my stories, who had learned to cook as a way of healing. I thought about the woman at the expo who had told me that my recipes helped her through her grief. I thought about the man who had written to say that cooking had saved his marriage. I thought about the teenager who had found confidence in the kitchen after years of struggling with self-doubt. This was my legacy. Not just the recipes, not just the television show or the cookbook, but the connections, the healing, the proof that it is possible to transform pain into something beautiful and nourishing. I had learned that the best revenge is not revenge at all. It is success. It is building something so authentic, so meaningful, so true to your own voice that it cannot be stolen or replicated. It is taking the fire that someone else lit and using it to cook something even better than they could have imagined. And that is exactly what I did. The cookbook went on to win multiple awards. The television show was renewed for 3 more seasons. I opened my own restaurant, a small place where every dish told a story and every meal was an act of love. But more than any of that, I had found my voice. I had learned to tell my own story, to claim my own space, to build my own success on my own terms. And every time I step into a kitchen, every time I light a burner or pick up a knife, I remember that moment when I struck that match and chose to create instead of destroy, to build instead of burn, to cook instead of cry. Because that is what we do. We take the raw materials of our lives, the bitter and the sweet, the painful and the joyful, the stolen and the sacred, and we transform them into something nourishing, something beautiful, something that feeds not just our bodies but our souls. That is the real recipe for success. Not the perfect technique or the expensive ingredients or the stolen stories. Just the willingness to keep cooking, even when your heart is shattered. Especially then. Because that is when the real magic happens. Thank you for watching our channel. If this story of resilience and triumph inspired you, please subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales of overcoming life's greatest challenges. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest uploads. And share this story with someone who needs to hear that their comeback can be greater than their setback. Your support means the world to us.